Hello, I'm Colleen Delaney. Welcome back to my channel, and we're going to talk about my most surprising reads of 2021. Now this is a mishmash. This is a mishmash. This is a mix. This is a mix of books that I was disappointed in. Books that I thought I would love and didn't love. Books that I thought I would be meh about and wasn't meh about. I was about. This has something that I thought I would either be like, yay, or ugh, and I was meh about. So it's just like a mix of books that did not hit me the way I thought they would hit me, and I thought it'd be kind of a cool video to do. So we're gonna start with Echotar, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, here is the thing. I already binge read a fairy romance YA series in my life. It was called Wicked Lovely by Marissa Meyer, if I remember correctly. I loved that. I loved that series. I read the hell out of it when I worked at a bookstore, and it's a 5-book series. I recommend it heartily. So that's part of the reason I hadn't read A Court of Thorns and Roses at all, because I already had a fairy series I loved when I was in my early 20s. I didn't feel like I needed another one, but I love fantasy. I love romance. Why wasn't I reading it? There was some deal on Kindle where you could get like 4 books for like $2.99 or something crazy like that. So I bought them, thinking if I loved it, I'd already had it. I went in thinking I was either going to absolutely detest these books or get addicted to them like everybody else. But here's the thing. I only read the first one. I thought it was fine. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't great. I haven't read any more. Everyone's like, you need to read it because book 3, I think, is the one that's like so good. It's so spicy. Here's the thing. I read spicy stuff all the time. I don't have to read an explicit YA novel to read a spicy scene. You watch my book reviews. I read a lot of spicy stuff. I don't know. Will I ever read the rest of the series? I doubt it. Here's the thing. I have them on my Kindle. If I find myself with a charged Kindle and nothing to do for like 12 hours one day, I might eventually read the second book, and maybe it'll make me read the rest. But in terms of like, I have so much other stuff I want to read, and I felt like it was very fine. Like that was like the epitome of like a 3.5 star read for me, which I feel no need to read anything else in that series. The next book that surprised me was The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. Okay, so in February last year, or February, I can't remember, when it was really cold and we had so much freaking snow, I'm in this Facebook group for everyone who lives in my neighborhood, just so we can be like, hey, does anybody know when the power's coming back on? And a woman who I've never met who lives in my neighborhood posted, does anyone want to trade books? Because I've been reading a ton. And so I gave her like 2 of my books and she gave me 2 of hers. We just put them in each other's mailboxes. And the books she gave me, I wasn't super excited about. I haven't actually read the other one yet. But I was like, oh, I'll start this one. Gabrielle Zevin, she wrote Elsewhere, I think. No, Teenage Amnesiac. Memoirs of a Teenage Amnesiac. She was a big YA writer when I was working at the bookstore. So I thought I'd give it a try. I know it's about a bookseller and it takes place on an island, and I thought I would, kind of like it. I freaking loved this book. There's so much in this book about what it means to work at a bookstore, which I super loved. Also, this book made me ugly cry so hard, and if I think too hard about the scene that made me ugly cry, I'll start crying again, so I've got to move on. Total surprise. Thought it'd be a 3-star read. It was a freaking 5. Loved this book. If you want to read a contemporary fiction about bookselling that really dives into characters who have experienced hard loss and what their lives look like after it, read this book. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Neon Gods by Katee Robert. I read the ARC, so I don't have it in hard copy. Here's the thing. Everyone loves Katee Roberts, and I know a lot of you are probably like, Katee Roberts just blew up on TikTok. What do you mean, everyone? I'm in a lot of romance book groups. So in the groups that I'm in, Katee Roberts been huge forever. Everybody has loved her pretty much since her first book came out. And if you're on Twitter and you're like in the Romance Landia community, you know who Katee Roberts is. I had never read one of her books because a lot of her books don't really like do it for me, because they are like either mafia romance type books, which isn't really my thing, or like the villain series isn't really for me. But this new book is like Hades' Persephone retelling, and since I am a big fan of Greek mythology, I thought I would give it a whirl. Here's the thing, I'm too big of a fan of Greek mythology for this book to work for me, because this is like, her big thing is like taboo, like kinky stuff, and that's fine. But in my brain, Hades is Persephone's uncle who kidnapped her and raped her, because that's what happens in the myths. That is what happens. So it was difficult for me to read a story about Hades and Persephone, even though they're not related in this. It's not that kinky. And the sort of rough stuff they get into wasn't for me. It's for a ton of people, obviously. You can see everyone freaking loved this book. But this turned out to be like a meh for me that I thought I would probably love, taking a chance on a new author. I won't necessarily not read the rest of this book, the books in this series, because I think it was really the Hades Persephone thing that was throwing me off, since I do have it so ingrained in my brain because I was a Greek mythology nerd. Okay, the next book is my biggest letdown of the year. That is not to say it is the worst book I read all year, because it's not, but it was my biggest letdown of the year because I honestly thought this was going to become one of my new favorite books, and I'll give you a little backstory on that. I love Arthurian legend. I wrote my senior thesis in college on Arthurian legend and the role of women in Arthurian legend, and when I was writing that, I used the book The Mists of Avalon, which is right here and is one of my favorite books of all time, about how the role of women in the legend changes depending on the time period the new version is being written. So when I heard that Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian was coming out, I was super excited. Also, I had been planning on working on an a feminist Arthurian legend retelling, which I did a ton of outlining and some preliminary writing on in like fall/winter of this past year. I heard this was coming out and stopped because I figured it wasn't a good idea for me to have a book like that coming out, or like trying to shop it basically when this was coming out. So I put it on hold, put it on the back burner, figured maybe in like 6 years I'll work on it. So this is the book that made me sign up for Book of the Month also. I was like, I really want this book. I can get it for whatever, like $9.99 was my first deal, and I bought it and started it, and the first line was so freaking good that I was really excited. It was like, I will die drowning, it has always been known. And I like books that are dark. Arthurian legend is a tragedy. It is through and through a tragedy. So I'm like, I'm gonna like this book. The narrator is Elaine, who's like the Lady of Shalott, if you are familiar at all. Here's what really bothered me. There are a lot of great reviews for this book who are people I think that don't know anything about Arthurian legend. There are so many anachronisms in this book. Now, she never gives us a time period. And honestly, I feel like she took the characters of Arthur, put them in a fantasy world, and then wrote her own story because it's so different. Like, there's not even like a glimmer besides the idea of Camelot and the characters' names, in my opinion, as to who these characters were in the legends. Something that drove me insane is that Elaine is good friends with Morgan Le Fay, and every time Morgan Le Fay uses her magic, she smells like oranges. Oh my God. Those people have no idea what a freaking orange is. And that happened so many times in the book, it like really took me out constantly. So while lots of people loved this book and it has great reviews on Goodreads, I could not handle it because I know too much about Arthurian legend and it felt like a fan fiction. It felt like the CW made a show about Arthurian legend to me, which, if that's your jam, like, I feel like if you loved Rain, you would probably love this. I didn't love Rain. I watched like one episode of it. The only reason I'm like totally going off on this is because I really thought this was going to be like my new favorite book. So I was so disappointed. But I think I gave it like 2.5 stars because, like, you know, it's fine. I understand why it got published. Some of the stuff really bothered me. It read more like YA than adult, so I do think this should have been marketed as a YA, and I don't think there was anything in it that could keep it from being a YA, and you all know how I feel about YA. Moving on. Okay, so the next book I was surprised by was The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. I actually took this as a recommendation off Darling Desi's channel. I don't even know if she read it and reviewed it, but I know she like talked about it and that it was like a thriller, a psychological thriller, but historical. And I was like, I'll buy it. And I actually bought it on a whim. I had a huge long list of books I wanted to buy at the bookstore one day, and they had like nothing that I wanted, but they had this. I hated the cover, but I don't try not to judge a book by its cover, but this is a terrible cover. The cover that's on Goodreads is way better. So I grabbed it. And one morning in, I think like August or July, I just took this book to the corner of my yard and I read it in one freaking sitting. It wasn't that it's like a 5-star read now and like my most favorite book ever. I think I gave it like 4-ish stars, but it was so compelling. Basically, the plot is that this British nurse has been commissioned to watch over this Irish child who is supposedly not eating and not dying and hasn't eaten for months and is not dying. So she goes, and this is also about, it takes place about 10 years after the potato famine, maybe 15 years. And she goes, and she's old enough that she should have known about the potato famine, but it talks a lot about how the Irish were basically treated like crap by the British at this point, and they didn't report on it at all, which is horrifying. It has a ton about the Catholic faith in it, and as a Irish American raised Catholic person, I really liked that part. It's very creepy. You really don't know what's going on. It's one of those where like you're seeing everything through the eyes of one narrator and she doesn't know what's going on, and she's like wrestling with her faith and her belief. It was a really good read. And the last book that surprised the heck out of me was Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. I almost didn't get this book. I was reading the picks that month. I think this was August for Book of the Month. And there was also like Damnation Spring, which looked good. And there was a fantasy, I can't remember what it was called now, that looked good. And I almost didn't get it. But I was thinking about how I hadn't read a contemporary fiction in a while. So I grabbed it. Okay, I think I originally gave this book 4 stars, but I need to go back and change it because I have not stopped thinking about this book. It has stuck with me to an insane degree. Trigger warnings, so many of them. Sexual assault, regular assault, murder, animal abuse, so many. But, and a lot of times I can't do a lot of those trigger warnings. And if they had listed them out, I don't know if I would have bought it. But it was such a good story. It like sucked me in. So I read this book in one day also. The Wonder and this, I read in one weekend. I think I read this in one day on Friday, and then The Wonder I read in one day on Sunday. Like, it was like, it was a good reading month. So this book follows Inti Flynn, and she is like what do they call her? Her job is to reintroduce wolves into the Scottish Highlands. I can't remember what her exact job title is. She has an identical twin sister named Aggie, and they're kind of hiding because something horrible had happened to them when they were in Alaska. But you really do not learn what happened, like the full extent of it, because you get some hints and you're like, oh, that's what happened. That's what happened. And then you're like, holy SHIT, that's what happened later. This is a book about people who have horrible things happen to them and do horrible things in turn. And I'm not just talking about the sisters. I'm also talking about the side characters. This book also has like, I probably shouldn't say it because it's a spoiler. Spoiler, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This book has the most brutal birth scene I've ever read. And I've given birth, And I was like, oh my God, this is insane. But like having given birth in my life, you can totally picture that happening. Spoiler over. So if you want to read a contemporary fiction that's just going to like staple itself to your heart, Once There Were Wolves. This book was so flippin' good. It's probably my best book of the year. I'm not committing until I do my best books of the year video, but it's probably my best book of the year because it's just like stayed with me so hard. And those are my most surprising books of 2021. I thought it'd be fun to do most surprising rather than like a top 10 and a top 10 worst, because why the heck am I going to spend time making a video about books I'm not. So I'll still do a top 10 video so you guys know what my most favorite books are, but those were my most surprising books. Books that definitely didn't hit me how I thought they would. Hope you're having a good day. I hope you're in the middle of a good book, or you're about to start a good book, or you're about to start writing a great book. See ya.